Today I have Justine Alter here with me. Justine is not on camera and using a voice modifier. So I think before we get into anything too in depth, if you don't mind explaining why do you do that so people can understand what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in a lot of different parts of the occult community and a lot of different organizations, and they all had different, I guess, beliefs and things that make you sort of not necessarily want to be on camera and use your voice. But yeah, I've gotten death threats. At one point there was talk about potentially, doing like ritually killing me. And then, and then other communities, there was like a focus and an emphasis on watching me for the rest of my life and watching everybody that I was around. And, that never really needed to be explicitly communicated to me because I would just see it happen to other people. I would get death threats before, but, there was one that was pretty significant. Everybody had my address. Everybody knew where I lived. And so I would stare at the door a lot and consider what would happen if people were to come through my door, and just kind of trying to make decisions about how I would handle that and how I would behave, and if I would play by certain rules or if I would not. And my priest and I, we both decided like that I was going to do nothing and I was going to just pass if that was God's will. And that's not something that I can go back on in my mind. I can't really, be like, oh, now I want to live by all means necessary, but I do want to respect the people around me. So I mean that was a decision that I made that changed my life, and God protected me. I immediately actually had to move for unrelated reasons. The people that were interested in potentially offing me like had, bigger issues to deal with. God really sort of orchestrated this so that I would be, kind of out of reach to a degree. But that was after that decision was made that I was willing to just die. And so the voice changer and not being on screen, that's out of respect for other people. And also for my spiritual father, because everybody's blessed to do different things. And I admire people that can really put themselves out there and like take hits. It's just not really what my situation is at this point.
Yeah, it's understandable. That's a lot, and I don't even know where to begin with thinking about stuff like that, because I've heard people who are like, yeah, I've had like death threats and stuff, and it's just, I don't even know how I would deal with that. So I think it's wise and prudential to remain anonymous and to kind of take care of your privacy and not put yourself out there in that way. But you are coming out there and telling your story because, as you kind of alluded to a little bit there, you have a background in the occult and you became an Orthodox Christian, and you wrote a book on this. So if you don't mind, just kind of unpack your story. What was your journey like? What prompted you? I mean, really, I guess you can kind of start from the beginning and kind of give like an overview of like what drew you to occultism, and then like what eventually led you out of that to Orthodoxy, and just kind of unpack that for people.
Yeah, so nobody told me until I was 21, but, I had a lot of lodge magicians in my family, and a lot of the women were working as psychics. And this goes back, at least several generations. And a lot of, people with, dreams about the future and this sort of thing. And there was this sort of pattern that I wasn't aware of where people in my family would essentially get traumatized by these circumstances and convert to Christianity. And so I didn't realize that was sort of like a pattern in my family. And then, I had a family member who was on the other side of the family that was that had kind of noticed that I had a capacity to put myself in other people's shoes and sort of know what they wanted. And he was like, awesome, like you can use this for business and you can surpass me and you can be a venture capitalist and you can kind of continue this this sort of like status and grow it. And so there was a lot of pressure for me to be interacting with a lot of children of, you know, very wealthy venture capitalists and things like this, and sort of to create a new off bridge of this network, you know, that was happening of investors. And it was a lot of pressure. And I think I was, you know, it's my earliest memories that this would start. And so there was a lot of conditioning and training for this that kind of fell apart as I became more and more spiritually sick. And because of the situation and how this, you know, somebody else brought this up to me, and I think that this is poignant, like that this is a common theme in like, you know, traditional religions or in occultism, like that you sort of, you find somebody with, you know, some sort of capacity for being able to see spirits or get inside people's heads or what have you, you know, and then you start figuring out how to utilize that for specific purposes that are within the context of your religion or your framework, or, you know, that's more task oriented. So I was drawn to occultism. I think probably, you know, I think that was probably a contributing factor, but also was, you know, hereditary at that point. And I've, you know, figured out that my mind was really geared towards understanding occult philosophy. And, you know, that's what I thought that I was good at. And so then I sort of drove into occultism. Yeah. So then I stumbled upon the Orthodox Church when I was 22. And I think by this time I had been, I had a lot of problems with, you know, demons taking my body, essentially. And I was studied by brain specialists and, you know, neuroscientists and stuff. There was a lot of pressure to get me well again and functioning. Because I would have a seizure, and then, you know, my voice and my personality and my mannerisms would change. And then I would have like another, it was called a pseudo seizure because it wasn't showing up as a regular seizure. When I was monitored. This would happen to me several times a day, every day for several years. And then, you know, I think by that point I had already felt like my value lied in what I could do, you know, like what, and under that context of delusion, like what you think that you have the capability to do, even if, you know, you're spiritually afflicted. So I kind of didn't really see myself as a human. I saw myself as a tool. And that was really difficult, and a prevalent part of my conversion to Orthodoxy was that I didn't really see myself as a human. I didn't really see anybody that was prioritizing my soul. You know, occultists were more interested in the fact that demons could take my body. I didn't really feel like I had much worth at all as a human. I felt like something that you would use like a hammer. And so that made my conversion to Orthodoxy very difficult. And I had some problems, like being able to successfully communicate what I was going through and what I was coming from. And so I ended up just sort of staying with the occultists and asking them for advice, because in the Catholic Church, a lot of occultists will stay there and they will be going to confession and receiving communion and doing all these things, but then doing ceremonial magic in the background. And a lot of that stems from, I think essentially the schism, right? Like the Catholics are in, you know, heresy, but, then during like Renaissance era, like there's a lot of magic books and spell books that came out that are, you know, kind of attributed to figures in Catholicism or magicians that were inside, Catholicism or at times Protestant denominations. And so people are sort of emulating the context of these books and that lifestyle that was prevalent that they're reading about. And so Yeah, so I knew a lot of occultists that were inside the Catholic Church, and I knew a couple that were inside the Orthodox Church. And God willing, I don't know if they've converted by now, sincerely, or if they're still doing that. But I mean, with this stuff too, like it's like you're hurting yourself. If you're just showing up and you're receiving, and then you're going back and doing ceremonial magic, it's not really like a threat to the parishioners. It's not really a threat to the church. It's like it's just like you're hitting yourself in the head, like probably definitely in a more serious way than that. That's one of the things that I focus on, is that, like, it's a problem that you hurt yourself when you enter the church, and you start partaking in the mysteries, and then you sort of continue a blasphemous lifestyle.
So what drew you? I know you kind of mentioned being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. What drew you to occultism? I think there's a little bit of a gap there in, like, okay, I can relate to other people, to, okay, now I'm going to start summoning demons and stuff.
Yeah.
How did you get from point A to point B, I guess?
Yeah, I don't really want to necessarily, like, see this as a fact of what was happening spiritually, because I do believe that this is a form of deception. But, I was very overstimulated by everybody. I was able to sort of feel their thoughts and their pain. Like an example that I give is whenever this one guy would walk into the room, I would immediately feel insane. I would feel like I was tripping. And I hated being around him for that reason. I was like, why is this guy, like, showing up here, and then I feel crazy, so I went through life feeling like I was crazy, but I was in contact with him later, and I said, hey, like, what was going on in high school with you? I was kind of trying to figure out, like, what was going on with me, and this was like the turning point to me, working as a psychic. And he goes, was he on LSD. And he was trying to pretend while he was in class that, like, the walls weren't breathing, the trees weren't breathing. So he was tripping. And so I would always feel like I was tripping when I was around him. And, he didn't really have any mannerisms or behaviors that would have alluded to this. And so then, one person that went to a different school showed up on the news, and they had fled the state for they had multiple assault charges, and it was kind of saying on the news some things about his background that were, I could see how he has led a very difficult life, and I hope he finds peace. But anyways, I had a brief encounter with this person, and then I became extremely depressed for like a half a year after that. Like a solid half year, I would say. I saw them once. I was very depressed for like half a year after this. And I was trying to communicate it to people. I was like, I hung out with this person like a few months ago. And they were just like, yeah, like, so what? And I really couldn't communicate everything that I was going through. But then, he showed up on the news, and it kind of clicked for me. Like, it felt like this, somebody clapped in my face or slapped me or like something like this. And I was like, I feel like I can completely like psychoanalyze him in the situation based on, like briefly meeting this person half a year ago. So then I go to his people that are close to him. I go to people that have been hurt by him. And, I'm like, did he feel this way? Was he going through this? Was he going through that? Did you feel like he was, going to do this for this reason or whatever? And they were like, yeah. So then I went back to everybody that I had kissed when I was in high school, because that's sort of like the easiest point of contact with somebody that like came up in my memories. And I was like, hey, like, were you secretly suicidal, like extremely suicidal to like somebody that I had kissed? And he's like, yeah, that year I was extremely suicidal. Yes. At this point, I was, sort of known on the internet for memes, honestly. Yeah, different time. Yeah, I was known for memes. So then I'm like, hey, who wants to?
We all had that time.
What?
So we all had that era.
Yeah.
Known. So we all had that era of being known for memes.
Yeah. So then I contact people. I'm like, well, yeah, I make this like post. I'm like, hey, I think I can read people. Who wants to like meet up with me at the next like noise or goth or punk show or whatever? Yeah, I want to touch your hand and see like what happens. So this happened, and so then I'm kind of like figuring it out, fine tuning it, like understanding like what these sensations that I'm experiencing mean. When you sort of you rely on ESP, you kind of like it's like you're how you like
what is ESP?
Extrasensory perception. Like okay. You're sort of like navigating this information that you're getting in a new way and trying to decode it and trying to like unpack it and explore it, and so that you can explain it in a way that is communicating the right information to somebody. And so then that was the start of my work as a psych. And so then I did that for a few years, and probably like aged me a million years. Like it's it can be kind of intense, honestly. There's a reason that people would use crystal balls, honestly, or mirrors or things like this in order to sort of filter out how damaging the sensations can be to the physical body. It's reported that a lot of people that were used for this, like they were child scryers kept in somebody's house and made to, discern information from spirits like that they would experience like eye strain or headaches, things like this, from staring at, scrying mirrors too long, or for, absorbing information, for too long. And so then they would eventually like go blind or pass away. And so I think that was one of the first things that I read, and I got woke on, that I felt like, these people needed resources and they needed protection and stuff like that. And I think that also reading cases of different governments utilizing psychics and them being overworked and them passing away, from this work, that I think that radicalized me a little bit. And then also my own experiences and the fact that there were still books that were being printed or published, and people like, oh yeah, the new edition, this occult book, it's so cool. And it would just be instructions about how to use children, and be like, you need to find a child this age with blue eyes, and they'll be used in this ritual for this context, like that kind of thing. So that radicalized me, because I also saw myself in these people, and I wasn't really like fully aware, that the extent to which I related to them, but I really did. And so that definitely like made me want to form a community of people that had extrasensory perception, in order to protect them too, because I think one of the people that ended up staying with me and like hanging out at my house a lot, he ended up living in our apartment. There were a bunch of psychics living in the same apartment, and he was escaping this occultist that basically figured out like that he had extrasensory perception that was derived from his trauma. And the occultist wanted to take him to parties, take him to social events, to banquets, to business meetings, and basically like whisper in his ear what everybody was doing and what he should be doing. And this became a point of concern for him, and he felt like he didn't have a way to get out or escape. And I think that a lot of this stuff, like, it's really detrimental, because there's not really a support system for this kind of stuff. Like, good luck trying to have anybody ever believe you. And that's definitely like held over your head too. you know? So that, you know, there's no like police for that. Yeah, don't even like get me started on the power structures. But you don't really have any resources. And so I think that made me feel like I wanted a little bit of like organization and militarization potentially, and like a community that was God willing, supportive, and loving. You know, I kind of wanted to like serve these people tea, and also like try to amp them up, you know, to defend themselves or be able to leave. So that was my motivation, my intention, and my background and my context going into starting this organization for psychics. And so then I came across the Orthodox Church while it was being legally formed. So it was awkward because I was filling out all the paperwork and everything, and I was starting this system, and we had already sort of established this, and then I came across Orthodoxy, and I was like, I'm really into grimoire traditions, and I'm kind of looking to get baptized in the Catholic Church. Why don't I just get baptized in the Orthodox Church? I had some experience around the Catholic Church and stuff like that, but we have the true church with the Orthodox Church, and so it's a bigger deal to be making these conscious decisions when you have the true church, and you have the true mysteries and the sacraments and the theology that's there. And so there was one point before my baptism where I tried to communicate to my priest what my life had been up until that point, and I just remember crying hysterically and shaking a lot and not really knowing how to formulate this, because honestly at this point, like, I had been rejected from schools, from like brain specialists, places, like people were like studying me and like photographing my diaries, like scanning them, trying to like figure out what was going on with me. So, and then they locked me in a room at school. Like, it wasn't like locked, but I was like told to go in this room and stay there whenever I would have like a pseudo seizure, and then behave in a way that was very disturbing, and then have another pseudo seizure. And it's very interesting because, in a different time or place, people would have been like, oh yeah, that's demonic. But in secular society, they're just like, oh, I don't know how to handle this, but she legally has to get an education, so like we're just gonna put her in a room. And I think that's a really big part of my book too. And also, there's a movie that this book is being adapted to, and it's pretty different from the book, I would say. It focuses on like demonstrating to the viewer what these concepts feel like and what they are like emotionally, and you sort of get like a fuller picture of these experiences, and not so much like the booyah, here are all my sources. And I felt like the sources was really important for the book, because the young man, the guru, and Elder Paisios, I think part of what made me actually want to read that was the fact that he was referencing all the books that he's using. Oh, you're reading that now? Yeah. I think with a occultist or ex-occultist, like, you want to know all the books that the person's reading and the context that they're coming from, and so that you can be judgmental about that. you can relate to that. And so I think it was comforting to me that the author of the young man, the guru, and Elder Paisios, that he had experiences with his friends working the Lesser Key of Solomon. And so that was really important for me to read and hear, and that made me sort of like relate to his situation a little bit better. And that's one of the reasons why I like read that book at a time where it was difficult for me to read Orthodox books. I think because I was 21. Yeah, I was 21 when I first was exposed to Orthodox Church. And, I went there and I immediately read monastic wisdom and I read the Way of the Pilgrim. And then I got to the Philokalia. I started talking to other occultists about the Philokalia. And suddenly there was like this really big shift in how they treated me and how they were talking to me. So that switch for me represented my loss of value, my loss of worth, my loss of potential to be utilized as a tool. So that was very difficult for me because I picked up on the fact that they were behaving differently around me as if I was going to lose my value. And I think that it was, they knew that it was a possibility that I would just peace out and I would, convert to Orthodoxy because I didn't know at the time that this was a stereotype, but it was with my family. Like my family, the women in it, they became extremely religious after working as psychics. And I think that when you get exposed to the spiritual world to some degree, even if it's not at a point of nepsis and like spiritual sobriety and it's full of deception and all these things, like you understand that things are real to a certain capacity, and you understand like hell is real. You understand demons are real. So the logical progression of that is to try to find the right faith, to try to follow Christ, because when you're sensitive, when you're picking up information, when you're grappling with these experiences, they're not comfortable. And so I think that was explained to me, like, you're very, very sensitive. You've been channeling demons for years and years and years. It's very interesting that you haven't dropped dead at this point. You're of use, you're of interest. You could be doing something really impactful for the occult world, right now and in the future. And so I think that, I didn't really understand the scope of what was happening. And I realized that I was starting to be seen as somebody that could potentially stop being valuable to the occult world. And by sort of like this, there's this delusion that like occultists retire to Orthodoxy, or they retire to a Christian religious system. And this is one of the reasons that I chose to go to a conservative Christian college, honestly, as a very goth ceremonial magician that was like really like trolly, like I was a little bit like manic and trolly. And it's because, I think one day I was like 10, I saw that, the Declaration of Independence, like Nicolas Cage movie. Yeah. And I think there's a scene in one of them or whatever where they're like, well, there are these ancient Sumerian hieroglyphics that we need deciphered. We need to go get this guy who doesn't want to be contacted, and he's retired, and he was an expert in all this crazy stuff. And like, he's like a professor at like a very conservative college, and he has like a big bookshelf. And he's like, leave me alone. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to, decipher the Sumerian hieroglyphics or whatever. And I could be like mixing up movies, and I'm sure that this isn't accurate to what happened. But anyways, in the back of my mind, I was like, all right, so the ex-occultists and ceremonial magicians and the lodge magicians, they're all retired once they reach a certain point. They choose certain things for their life, and then they go and they just retire into a comfy professor job at a conservative Christian college. So if I want to go to a super liberal artsy college or whatever, I'm going to find a lot of like new age people that really think that they know what they're talking about. But if I go to a conservative Christian college, then I'm going to find all these people that like got too far into something and now they just want like a calm life for the rest of their life. So this turned out to be accurate. And they retired to Orthodoxy, or they retired to, you know, Catholicism or something like this. And I think more and more prevalent it's become Orthodoxy. And it's really interesting because that really influenced me when I decided to genuinely convert by myself. I mean, I converted with my friend, but like outside the knowledge of my priests and the parishioners and things like this, when I was burning, you know, like 80% of my possessions, I was disappearing, I was changing my life, all this kind of stuff. Like, there was this feeling of like, I guess I'm retired. Like, I don't know what to do with the rest of my life now. I've given up my career. I've given up all my prospects. I've given up my support system. I've given up, you know, how I'm viewed to a very large amount of people. I've given up the only thing that I think that I'm good at. And I guess I'm retired. And I think that the more Orthodox that I become, you know, the longer that I've stayed in the faith, how long has it been? It's been like almost 6 or 7 years, I would say. Yeah, I realized that I have not even shown up to the job interview. Like, I'm trying to figure out like what shoes to wear to the job interview to get the job. Like, I haven't even gotten the job, much less retired from the spiritual life. It's a really big misconception that occultists have, and I think that it keeps them within their own little parameters of how they conceptualize life. It's like, you know, somebody left the OTO lodge and they're Orthodox now, they've retired. But you get into Orthodoxy and you haven't even started. You know, you started by proxy of entering the church, but like this is the real spiritual life. So I guess, you know, if anybody's listening to this and you feel like you don't really know what to do with the rest of your life, and now that you've decided to adopt morality and immoral world, you're not retired. Don't worry.
So what was your first exposure to Orthodoxy? And I mean, coming from your background, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was really painful. I think that there are a lot of ceremonial magicians that do get to convert and be fully Orthodox in their intentions, you know, during their baptism and while they're receiving the sacraments. That wasn't my experience. You know, I was still doing ceremonial magic and I was doing all these things when I entered the church. Somebody converted me from my my organization for psychics. It was my treasurer, and he started, you know, deciding not to sign the paperwork and started blocking my movements as like the director of this organization for psychics. And you know, he decided he's going to follow Christ, and he was interested in Orthodoxy and everything. So he was just kind of like, you know, you don't really have to keep making these decisions. You know, there is going to be a place for you inside the church. You know, I know that you don't really feel like you have a lot of resources, but you also never really grown up around people that think that they have abilities inside the church. And, you know, there are a lot of people out there that are struggling, that you deal what you deal with, and they're trying to be good Christians. So, you know, he made some arguments at a time where I was very fatigued from running this business and going to church. Or sorry, it was a nonprofit. So I decided to fully convert to Orthodoxy and, you know, partake of the church life in a more genuine capacity. And that's what I did. You know, I started seriously making an effort, and I burned a lot of my possessions. You know, there were these huge bonfires of all my art, all my occult books, everything that I was doing that was related to my career. And, you know, I did not communicate this to, you know, my priest at the time. that I was doing this and I was going through this, because I think there's a lot of conditioning that happens, and I don't really believe that it's any one person's fault or any occultist's fault out there. And I'm not trying to be like a victim about it, but when you're in this situation, you grow up with this, and then it's hereditary, and then you've been rejected from a lot of different places, and a lot of people find it really difficult to understand your life, much less help you leave or help you navigate it or help you conceptualize the world differently and what you feel like you can do with your mind differently and all this kind of stuff. You feel really alone. You feel isolated. And I think that was something that I was trying to figure out, because then I started confessing more genuinely, and I'm like, I see demons all the time, and so then there's this pushback, like, how is that even possible? Because you're behaving like a normal person, you're talking to me like a normal person. And I'm just like, because it's been like a decade, this is most of my life that I have been dealing with this stuff. Like you appear as a normal person, even though you're constantly witnessing horrific things and getting information about other people. So I think that's part of why I felt so comfortable around occultists, is because it was easier for them to conceptualize and understand what I was going through and potentially, give me advice. And so eventually one day my priest, his face changed. We were in choir practice, and he said, I need you to go to this monastery and speak to this abbess. And you might not want to leave. That's an obedience. And he made the sign of the cross over me. And then it looked like he like snapped out of it. He like snapped out of that sort of like state that he was in when he was telling me that. And he looked kind of shocked and like he scandalized himself. He was like, that wasn't an obedience. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And he looked like genuinely concerned. Like, it's like, you don't have to do that. I don't know why I just said that. You don't have to do that. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. So I did start talking to more clairvoyant elders and abbesses, and having more exposure to that. And over time, I think that was really, really helpful for me. Kind of starts off like you go there and you kind of have like a question or whatever, and then you go back to your life, and maybe it changes a lot, but I think nothing will compare for me to like watching people that are used to being around their elders, their spiritual fathers or Mount Athos or things like that, where you're surrounded by like years and years and years and maybe thousands of years of how Orthodox clairvoyant people behave, because of their struggles, because of dispassion, because of the prayer of the heart. And I think that really taught me a lot about the world, was just being around monastics and around clairvoyance that wasn't, a result of doing magic as a result of hereditary inheritance or trauma. It was a result of trying to attain the prayer of the heart. And that was a huge difference for me. The behaviors are very different. The rationalization is really different. The self-justification is non-existent, because they don't take responsibility for it. And that is such a big deal, because the world will be like, you have an ability, you have a tool. And I think I've been burned so many times in the Orthodox community Not like, oh, it's, it's somebody's fault. Like people don't know, but you go into a parish or setting or Orthodox friends or whatever, and you're like, I've had this ability my whole life, and they're like, yes, yes, yes. So God must have given this to you, and you were living in sin before. You were living in a different paradigm, and you did not have the church, and so it was used for bad. But now you have the church, and now it can be used for good. And so then you're like, yes, yes, like I would love to be a good person. That would be great. And it's like maybe you can like do things for the church, and like, God must have given this to you. This is probably neutral because you don't really seem like you're just like wicked cackling person. So this must be something that can be used for good. And you're like, yes, yes, I have this chance to be good. So then the second that there's like a misunderstanding or miscommunication or agreement, like I felt like suddenly I'm potentially like labeled not good anymore, right? So because then the people's viewpoint of view changes. There's like a disagreement or misunderstanding or some sort of miscommunication. The adversary is always trying to separate people, and then suddenly this person that you disagree with, you feel has the capacity to read minds, right? So then that's jarring, right? That's off-putting. Then that's like they are cast aside. I think I definitely have caused some discomfort, like trying to work through what I'm supposed to be doing and like what my functionality is supposed to be inside the church. And so I have found a lot of comfort in being around people that are genuinely clairvoyant, where their elder was clairvoyant, and then their elder was clairvoyant, and they're used to this because the behavior is very different from what I did, from what I was used to and what I was accustomed to, and all the psychics that I knew, it's very, very different. For example, there was this one guy. I was in a monastery setting, and there was this one guy, and he was in shock. He was freaking out about my confessor, and he was like, this priest told me that like I was gonna go meet these people, and then I was gonna go have to make this decision, and then I had better make the right choice. And he's like, he went to my confessor. He's like, how did you know that I was gonna meet these people? Like, how did you know that I was gonna have to make this choice? And my confessor, he goes like, I don't know. God knows. It's not me. It's God. Like, I don't know. And so you kind of have, these people that have genuine clairvoyance, and they've achieved the prayer of the heart, and that kind of situation, presenting what has just happened as if they have had nothing to do with it at all whatsoever. And you actually believe them is the thing, that they actually feel this way, that they actually feel like they had nothing to do with it whatsoever. Because I think with psychic work and people that have these intuitive capacities, and it's a little bit more worldly, and it's not really because they've achieved the prayer of the heart or reached a state of dispassion or something like that. There is sort of this undertone of like, yeah, but I really actually think it was like me, and I'm cool. You know what I mean? And I do not see that. I do not see that around me, and the behaviors are very different. I have this memory of like me following the priest's wife around while she's like super busy, like running around the parish doing things, and I'm like, is it ever just like, do you ever just like feel like you're destroying so much of your life when you converted? And she's just like, yeah. I'm like trying to like figure out ways to cope with my situation without like letting anybody know what's going on. And there's this like really interesting moment. I think it took me a significant amount of time to burn all my stuff, like a few weeks or something. And I think one of the biggest and most important things that I did was throw away all my ritual tools, because at this point I really loved like daggers. I was modifying them for people. I was doing a lot of like really dumb entry level metal work and stuff like that. That was sort of utilized for ritual purposes, like a lot of like dremeling onto blades. And then there's this method of I don't want to say consecration, but that's what occultists call. They call it consecration, where you're consecrating them in different ways. And then some traditions they'll have you like dip the weapons into like boiling pots of herbs, and all this stuff that has all these associations and whatever. But throwing away all my ritual tools and my daggers and my weapons and all this stuff, because that symbolized to me that I was relying on God to protect me, rather than my own like demented intensity. It's like, sort of redirected into trying to figure out ways to defend myself in the spiritual world, right? I mean, when you've had your situation in your life and your body compromised by demons so many times, like it's very daunting to let God handle it. So then that kind of plays into I forgot exactly which book Father Seraphim Rose was talking about it, but he was talking about how God's supervision, he blocks you from a lot of unnecessary pain and things in the for lack of a better word, like in the astral, like in the spiritual world. Like God will protect you, kind of like Theotokos with her protecting veil, and so you may think like, oh, I'm experiencing like very intense things and a lot of pain, and I have no idea how this could ever be covered without me actively making decisions and me actively, educating myself and doing obscure rituals to try to soothe this situation. But it's really a matter of how much trust you're placing in God. And yes, of course, like there's still suffering, and it's worth it to be in the right environment and be under the right instruction, and be confessing all the right things, and growing in that direction. I think that part of the jump from occultism to orthodoxy was, being aware of the story of Saint Cyprian and Justinia, and I was also like aware of their sort of alternative narratives that are associated with Saint Cyprian and Justinia, sort of like these blasphemous offshoots and mystery cults, that are associated with that pairing. But in the true actual story, her purity and her faith in Christ is what protects her from, like, arguably like the most powerful sorcerer in the world, right? So me entering the church, knowing that I am unworthy of being protected in the way that Saint Justinia was, is daunting. When you have a lot of people that are around you that are very dangerous and they are trying to hurt you on a regular basis, you're waking up and in the morning and you're watching people like make posts about like how they're trying to kill you with magic all the time. I think that that's very draining, and I'm watching a lot of wars break out between occultists over like ideological matters, and now they're like, now this person has offended my honor and now they are going to die. Like it's exhausting. And that's like the environment that I was in. I'm like, okay, so how is God gonna protect me, because I'm not worthy. Like I'm coming into the church very dirty, like very, very dirty, and with no understanding of what I'm supposed to be doing or how to accomplish that. And at this point, like I'm having trouble reading Orthodox books. I think that I had that trouble for several years because of what happened with the Philokalia, where I kind of attributed my interest in Orthodox books with the loss of my value. Because occultists were aware, like, okay, she gets interested in this stuff, she's gonna probably convert, and then we're not gonna be able to use her. So everybody that you're surrounded by is expressing like this disappointment that they're not overtly communicating to you. And so I wasn't able to really read a lot of Orthodox spiritual books for a few years because I had that sort of like subconscious memory of like disappointment, loss of value, that kind of thing. So that, I'm entering the church with like these hangups, these inabilities, this dirt on me with betrayal, that I have betrayed the church system. And I'm supposed to go ask God for help to have him protect me when Saint Justinia has been perfect. She has been, well, nobody's perfect, but she's been a very pious woman. She has devoted her life to Christ. She is depending on the story, the version of the story that you read, like she's holding vigils at night, like this kind of stuff. I'm very lazy. How is God supposed to offer me the same protection that Saint Justinia would when I'm surrounded by people that, want to hurt me to some capacity or another? I think even giving up my role at the center in this sort of position of power, like in this community of psychics, like, when you're in a position of power, you're not always aware of the ways that you're negatively affecting other people. And I think that I was annoying, and I think that I negatively affected people. And when I converted to Orthodoxy genuinely, I stopped talking. I was traumatized because I gave up everything in my life to do this. I started going by my legal name again. I had an alias that I did psychic work under, and that was, a large part of my identity. I wiped information about me. A bunch of websites that I wrote for, like occulture websites, like they crashed or went under around this time. And I was traumatized. I was basically mute for a very large period of time. I did not talk because there was nothing to talk about. If I've devoted my life to occultism and I can't, and it's worthless. Everything that I had was suddenly worthless. And so I wasn't talking. And so people that had been, hurt by me or annoyed by me definitely took that as a opportunity to air their grievances with me. And sort of try to rework a new sort of structure system and kind of figure out where we all fell into place. And so, there's at this point, there is resentment towards me. There are people that are out there that are still actively trying to unalive me. There are people that have, considered ritually killing me, that could potentially find out where I'm currently located, if they weren't busy or they haven't moved on to other things at this point. I'm surrounded by so much pain and so much, negativity, at this point. And I think that there was a lot of genuine love also. But when you're entering a new, when you're entering the truth, you're entering Christ, right? You just have to be careful with that stuff too, because, even people that love you could be like, hey, this isn't the best thing for you. And I think part of the reason why I really wanted to disappear as a public figure too is, when you're so accustomed to a certain way of life and you've been through so much rejection from exoteric, mundane society, when a large percentage of the population doesn't even believe that you exist, so really what can be done to you multiplies. When I was discerning monasticism, one of the many times I really wanted to go join this one monastery, and the abbess there, she was extremely clairvoyant. She told me everything that was wrong with me medically, that doctors couldn't figure out, that I didn't know, that I had never really told anyone. And she said, listen, there's been some damage that's been done to this, system in your body, makes it so that you can't fast. You're going to come here, you're going to try to fast like everybody else. It's going to be so painful for you that you're going to stop eating. And then you're going to stop eating, and then we're going to have to take you to the hospital. And and she was like, and also demons are going to be injuring you so frequently because of the rights that you've given to demons that we are not going to be able to afford your hospital bills. We are just not going to be able to do that. And then she had to go. She I was really devastated, but I think that that's one of the amazing things for me about being around clairvoyant monastics and elders and abbesses and this kind of stuff, is that their behaviors are so different from the world of psychics. Their behaviors are so different. I think one of those things is that they do not accept any responsibility for the information that they're getting. They don't think it's them, they think that it's just God's doing whatever he wants to do. And a part of that is not sugarcoating things to people. It's not trying to make them feel a certain way. It's not trying to coddle them. It's being like, hey, demons are going to injure you so badly that we're not going to be able to pay your hospital bills. You can't marry God here right now. And then they have to go take care of something. But they have every faith that God will take care of you. And they have the prayer of the heart, and they're praying for you. I did not leave my room, and I cried for a very significant period of time. Maybe it was a couple days. I don't know. I just remember being in my room, at this point, I love God more than anything. And I've given up everything for him that I'm, aware of and that I have the capacity to do. Why can't I marry God? And, I cried for a very long time. And, but then, things fell into place for me later, actually pretty immediately. I do think that those sisters in that abbess was praying for me to, find my situation. And, at that point, she didn't need to sit there and be like, oh, honey, it's okay, honey, you're going to be all right. And just sit there and pat me on the back. She was like, okay, I have to go make some phone calls, and, that's kind of the opposite of what you're trained to do as a psychic. You have all these little secrets and these little narratives in your head, and you really think that it's you doing this thing, and you think it's this ability that you can wield, and you think it's a tool. And the fact of the matter is that the people that where their elder's been clairvoyant, their elder's elder has been clairvoyant, and this person is from Mount Athos, and then this person's from Optina, or what, these really long traditions. There's not a lot of information on people coming into the church that have hereditary extrasensory perception and how to manage that and navigate that. And I think part of the reason potentially is because the people that are actually clairvoyant in the church that have kind of gotten it through the prayer of the heart, through dispassion, through suffering, or just, for their salvation or what have you, they don't see it as part of themselves. They don't identify with that being an ability or a tool. It has lessened for me to an insane degree where I am able to live a comfortable life now with perception. Demons no longer attack me physically, because at one point, I was getting x-rays and stuff like that, and the doctors were kind of concerned. And they actually, I think the scariest thing about that was that there's this doctor that I know, and he likes being right, and he likes being like, oh, got you, I know this thing about you, you must like your bones are at this angle or whatever, like you must have like problems with indigestion or whatever. And he like looked at my x-rays, and he just like was like, are you getting these x-rays look like you're getting recently repeatedly choked. And how do you deal with that? Like, how do you, I wouldn't have been able to, if I wasn't around, if I wasn't around monks that knew what that felt like.
Yeah. Thank God. God knows what we need and has his way of giving it to us in our time and putting those people there to help us. Yeah, it leaves me speechless sometimes, because I, like you, we all know that we're undeserving of these things, but to experience it, it does leave you speechless at times.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that the conceptualization of psychic ability being an ability, that information that I'm receiving, that things that come up in conversation sometimes or whatever, could be something that could have like this alternative spiritual narrative to it, or it could be a power that I have, or anything like that, that immediately has to be pushed out of my head. Because I look at the humility of people that are actually known for being clairvoyant, and in the church, and in this sort of true way, and how they disregard it as part of themselves. And I know that the traps that you can fall into with that are severe. They are great. And I've watched the majority of people that I love in my life like undergo a break from reality as a result of this, as a result of sort of consenting to this, like being a power and ability, something that you can sort of like keep secrets with, know things about other people at will, or just something that props up your pride, that sort of like leads you down these paths of potential prelist. And I know how fragile that is and how dangerous that is, and I do believe that Father Seraphim Rose was right when he was talking about how it's not always your fault.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that I envy, because I know like people who, whether it's clairvoyance or an ability to sort of read people, or whatever gradation of that exists, I do believe that is a very real thing that people experience. And when I read people like the lives of saints, like my patron saint, even Saint John Maximovich, he had some level of clairvoyance, and I feel like he knew how to handle that because he was a very holy person. And if you are not holy, it can be very dangerous. Like you said, it's not something that I envy at all. I would not want to be clairvoyant. I wouldn't want to know. Like, imagine having like X-ray vision. Like, you don't really want that. But to be able to understand noetically like what's going on in people's minds, or like if you choose to tap into, obviously I don't know exactly how that works on a mechanical level, but like I would not want to deal with that. So I don't envy you, and I'm sure that's very difficult. And thank God that you found the church and have at least some framework and paradigm of how to deal with that now.
Yeah, and I don't even really, it's not part of my identity. It's not part of my everyday life. And I think when I do get hit with like a potential temptation, like I go up to like a babushka or whatever, and like I hand him a bag of chips or something like this, and they're like, oh, I've been thinking about chips all day. I really wanted chips or whatever. Like, it immediately has to be pushed out of my mind that I'm doing anything at all, because I'm not. And God just sees that this person is struggling and that they're, pious and they're a good person and they just really would like some chips and he wants to bless them with some chips. Or I'm just using it as an example, but, then it doesn't have anything to do with you. And I think that's the example that I see, that's probably like led to the healthiest expression in my life that I've experienced so far.
This is a very lame example, but like there's the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. There is like potential to use something like that to the detriment, as I think you have in the past, but there's also the potential that you could use it in a very positive way, and that God could bless it. And, we're all called to be saints ultimately. So obviously that's a much harder path, but that is also a possibility.
With my experiences in the church setting, it's very difficult, like coming into a church and kind of, there's some like misconceptions about it, or like people don't really like know what's going on. And, they kind of like, they think of this as this power, this ability that you can wield. And now you've been wielding in the past and it's been bad, but now you have the potential to do good with it. And they're like, oh, maybe you could do work for the church. You could figure out like where we could build a church. Maybe I can check things with you. Like maybe this could be like something that's good for like security purposes for the church. Church is in like a, kind of a sketchy location or what have you. I've definitely encountered experiences like that where they're like, okay, so you have this thing that is neutral and you've been using it for evil, but now you can potentially use it for good with the right backing and the right support system. It's very dangerous to kind of consent to that and go through with that, like as somebody in my position, because you're like, yes, I want to be good. I have the potential to be good. I want to be good. And then the second that sort of like the adversary sort of presents some sort of a miscommunication or some sort of disagreement in there, then, from like the opposite party's perspective, like, they suddenly disagree with somebody or they have a miscommunication with somebody. You can like think of the negativity that people have to fight through when they have like disagreements or miscommunications with people that don't have these abilities. But then these perceived abilities, but then when they see like when somebody sees like an opposing party or somebody that they're disagreeing with or communicating with, or that there has been some hurt that has been caused, and then that person also, they feel, has the potential to be able to read people's minds, then there is sometimes like a very extreme pushback towards that person. And I definitely, that has caused me pain in the church. I would say it is much easier for me to sort of ignore and not make it part of my identity and try to live a life without the danger of prelace, than just to sort of think like, oh, maybe I can use this for good now, because I've definitely been in some situations where suddenly there's like a 180 shift on you, where like suddenly you are evil now, again. And it's so that can get really complicated really fast, for sure. There's some other people in the church that have been through similar things, and that I've kind of found out about in the last few years. I just kind of see them as my brothers and sisters that are struggling, and I think there's more accountability now for me. Like I think that we get told a lot of the time, like to ignore it. But how do you ignore something that you've used your entire life, or that maybe something that you don't fully understand? And I think a lot of ignoring it comes from not attaching importance to it, not building narratives about it, not engaging with it, not giving the adversary things to mentally work with. Because I think that my friend and I, we both kind of like realized at one point that we both were struggling with the same thing and we were getting the same advice. And so we wouldn't really like ignore it. We would sort of like make fun of it. We would joke about it. We'd use words. We would, be like, "Oh man, you're pre-lesting again." Like we just, because when you are receiving, like Saint John the Latter talks about this, that like in a lot of situations, like a demon will present logisme to one party and then they'll inform the other party of the other person's logisme so that they get filled with pride and then they act on it and they will understand what the other person's logisme was, because they're both receiving information from demons and they're essentially being like tabletopped, right? Like, how like in grade school somebody is making a table position behind somebody and then another person is pushing them and they trip over the second person. Like that's something that's in the Ladder of Divine Ascent. I think it's under pride or vainglory. I think pride. And part of that also is angels appearing to people, angels and saints appearing to people in a sort of burlesque sense. And so I think it's really awesome that we have spiritual fathers. We have, people to go to. And if your spiritual father's like, go ask, so-and-so about it, maybe blessed or whatever. But we do have structure in this church in order to sort of have the humility to rely on somebody else's understanding of your situation instead of building these worlds in your head. I think a lot of engaging in psychic work was about what I didn't say and then making decisions based on that information. And I think that's almost more damaging because people can't really check that. And a lot of what I saw was the high self-trust that comes with this information. And yeah, so my friend and I were receiving the same advice and we were joking about it. We were not really taking this very seriously because at the end of the day, if you're getting sort of information that somebody is going to walk into this room in 5 seconds and tell you that they like potato salad, and then they walk into the room in 5 seconds and they tell you that they like potato salad, it's very difficult for the individual and the person to ignore that, right? Like what does it mean to ignore that? And so we didn't really take it seriously. And I think we wanted to bond and we wanted comfort over this situation. And, you see how people talk about like TV shows. Of course, they would talk about stuff like this, you know what I mean, in the worldly sense. But my friend, underwent a lot of very extreme circumstances and stress. And then this happened. And because I wasn't a very encouraging and accountable friend to them. And, in this regard, and sort of like, yeah, like let's dismiss this. Like, let's, do a choke together or whatever. Like they had a break. And I think that this is so common in psychic culture is that like, it just takes like some hormones, some stress, some, maybe some sort of really extreme situation. And then you also have that high self-trust like tacked onto that. And then suddenly like you're like driving along, you're not really thinking about anything. And your friend is talking to you like you both are having this conversation and they're answering you back. And I think that's something that I've witnessed so many times. And it's something that I don't want to be responsible for again, because I think that this also happened to a family member of mine. I was like, hey, it runs in our family. We need to explore these abilities, like check this out. Like we can communicate without words, and then suddenly like this leads to like this charismatic Christian situation. And they think that they're, having all these communications, and there's no like level of spirit discernment or filtering. So I do feel responsible for that situation that happened, and that person ended up having a full psychotic break, and had to be medicated, and had to have a caretaker at one point. And I felt responsible for that because, yeah, there were other factors that contributed to that full break, but relying on invisible communications was not stabilizing for them. And so I have a lot of I don't want to say blood on my hands, but I have a lot of spiritual dirt on my hands, and may these people be saved, and may I pray for them every day for the rest of my life because of how the decisions that I made that have influenced them. It's a difficult thing to navigate, and it's very safe to sort of try to get out of this situation.
Yeah, well, thank God that you at least have spiritual father and monastics you can go to talk about these things, because you're absolutely right. You should not trust yourself. And I guess kind of maybe like rephrasing the way that I put it, because obviously you can't just, if this is like spiritual intel that you're getting from the enemy, you obviously can't use that for good ultimately because it comes from the enemy. But I do think that there's also a level of like everyone is created uniquely, and there's a lot of things about us that don't make sense, that God willing, with time and repentance and obedience, those things will make sense, and maybe those dispositions can be used for good, but it takes a long time, and it's definitely not an overnight thing in Orthodoxy. It requires asceticism, it requires repentance. No one becomes a saint overnight. You have to actually practice the faith and live it out, and it's very difficult, but it takes time.
Yeah, I really like what's that guy that does Orthodox talks? That monk priest, Cosmas.
Priest Monk Cosmos. Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about this stuff a lot, and he talked about how there was this example, this one saint that started off in like full deception, and was basically giving advice from the enemy and things like that, and he was eventually corrected, and then he achieved sanctification. I think that he became blessed with genuine clairvoyance. So it is definitely like possible to do that full 180. And I really like what Saint Porphyrius says about whatever we're given exactly is what's needed for our salvation. So, if I hadn't really had these circumstances and this situation, I guess, these are the circumstances and the situation, the background that would lead to my individual salvation. And I love the implication of St. Porphyrius saying that, because I think we think of him as like having these really, really deep, amazing, holy gifts that are like added on bonuses, incredible. But I think that him saying that sort of implies that he felt like the gifts weren't like these like bonus things, but that they were like integral to his salvation. And I think that the implications of that are really huge. Like, would it be detrimental for him to not have those circumstances, depending on his individual disposition?
You mentioned that you were baptized and you were still practicing occultism technically at the time. So at what point, how long did it take for you to realize like, okay, I can't do this anymore if I'm going to be Orthodox?
It would be between like 6 to 8 months, I would say. I think I kind of brought this up to somebody else that like when you're living like multiple lives, like it's interesting to try to figure out these points where these events that are happening intersect. And so it kind of like takes a lot of mental strain to sort of like chronologically place things. But I would say probably like half a year is what I conceptualize it as. I know that Holy Week, I was baptized in the summer. And then Holy Week the following year was when I was burning all my stuff. But I think that I had converted within maybe like 6 months, and then it was taking me a very long time to be burning all my stuff. This girl converted with me. She was like, we're burning carloads of stuff. Yeah. So, but it's Holy Week. We should go to Unction. So we walk into Unction after we've just been burning copious amounts of occult books. And so I vividly remember this because we smelled like burnt paper and plastic, and we were like trying to cover it up. And I think there were, potentially like some people that were kind of like, something smells really bad. And it was definitely us. So I'm not really sure exactly when I converted. I think it was around 6 months, maybe within the time frame to 8 months or something like this. But I know that I was baptized in the summer, and then by the time I was done burning all of my possessions, it was like about Holy Week the next year.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I have a lot of like just random curious questions, because I think you have made a journey that I think I see a lot of people who are wrapped up in this to varying degrees, like whether it's new age or occultish stuff, adjacent, and they're either in that or they're working their way out of that. So I have a few questions about that in general, about what that's like and what you think about those things. So I guess one thing just to kind of start that out would be like, I see a lot of people who are drawn to the new age or the occult, and just from observation, that tends to be a lot of young women. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel that, I used to lecture on psychic ability, and I think one of the talking points that I used was like socially acceptable forms of that. And one of that's like mother's intuition, right? So that, and then like people will be like, oh, the gray matter in the brain increases, and women are just more likely to rely on intuition and social nuances in order to sort of make decisions, and that is sort of like a biological wiring thing. I think that potentially there's something to that. I think that our saints talk at times about women sort of having like a spiritual sensitivity, right? So then Saint Seraphim, he kind of makes the distinction between sensuous perception and spiritual perception. So you have like the spiritual discernment that comes from like fasting, visuals, the prayer of the heart, these tools. And then you have sensuous perception, which is like, your dog barks at like a mysterious corner of the house for some reason. I used to hang out with a lot of people in like the voodoo community, and you could always tell when it was insane. Like people that were initiated, it's essentially like you get initiated into a traditional religion or voodoo house or something like of this sort. And you agree to have a head spirit, which is basically, something that they consider to be a spirit that like the Orthodox would consider to be a demon installed inside their head, semi-permanently, in accordance to their perception of that. And I think that part of the reason that I don't really speak on possession anymore is because I think that if you go to Mount Athos to assess a situation, they are going to have a very large spectrum of vocabulary and perception that I am not versed in, to sort of in terms of how they perceive this information versus how psychics are perceiving this information, how lay people are perceiving this information. But they feel that for the rest of their life, they will have this spirit inside their head, and they will have a court of spirits around them. They will have things that are associated with that house and that family and their personal life for the rest of their life. And there is something very tangible to that. And they basically give consent for the spirit to basically take over their body at will. And you see, like, you see people that have been initiated into these systems, and people around them will be very shocked sometimes when their face completely changes into another person's face. And there are different things that they do to sort of test that you are being ridden, or they feel that, like, to test that you are being possessed. Like walking across like hot coals, like drinking incredibly spicy liquor, like doing things that normal humans can't do in order to sort of prove to the community that you are having your body completely taken over. But anyways, I was very good friends with somebody that was initiated and they had a head spirit. And whenever we went to somebody's house that had like dogs, like the dogs would all start barking at them and freaking out and just flipping out because they could sense that, there were spirits around and there was a spirit potentially inside this person's head, that could potentially take over their body. So you make that distinction between spiritual perception, like you go to Mount Athos and somebody like looks at you and tells you what you did when you were 12 and that you need to repent, versus like these dogs barking at somebody that is chosen to undergo like a consensual lifelong possession. There's spiritual discernment, spiritual perception, and then there's these basic primal things that people pick up on. And a lot of people believe that women have more of a tendency to be aware of these basic primal things that people pick up on. And I think one of the problems, or one of the really interesting things that I see with men coming into the church is it tends to be really ideology based, and like, I need to have the true faith, the exact faith. I need to have these parameters. I need to have this philosophy on lock. And I think part of that is biological too, because you come from like rural traditions. Let's say that you're like from this, random European village or whatever. There's a lot of God-fearing behavior that is just taken for granted, and is sort of the structure system, and you're working with your hands and you're outside and you're building things and you're growing your food. There is a different level of like psychological health that goes on there. And I think that with the destabilization of America and globalism and all this kind of stuff, like there is this strong biological urge for men at times to have the right faith and something to submit to so that they can correctly lead a family. And that is definitely like something that I had seen, like that there's a desire for stability, for proof, for you to intellectually know that you're making the right choice so that you can submit to the church, so that you can be somebody that other people are worthy of submitting to. And I think for women, where, the sort of the biological disposition is to rely a little bit more on like social intelligence and being able to make certain decisions in order to care for other people really fast, to be aware of safety, to be aware of security, to be aware of nurturing when they do have a child, to be aware of somebody that can't speak English, can't communicate with them, intuit what that person needs. So there are some extra steps that are involved. And I think that there is an overwhelming amount of opportunity for sensuous perception to flourish in occult circles. And I think that doesn't really have much to do with truth, but it has to do with social intelligence, basic spiritual perception, understanding that there is something to this, that there is something there. It might not always be correct and it might not always be the truth, but the draw towards mystical experiences, I feel, is a big potential temptation for women. There's also, more variety in aestheticism in occultism, which, the Orthodox Church is very beautiful, but a lot of women have not necessarily been exposed to it and to its beauty. And so I think there is a draw to look for beauty and to look for social intelligence, sensuous perception, mystical experiences. People are really enthralled by their use of the word magic for everything. They're like, oh, this is so magical. This place is so magical. This is, it's very this positive descriptor. I don't subscribe to that. I don't feel like that is a positive descriptor based on my background. But there there is this draw to the occult, and I understand why people feel like it is more prevalent for women, because there are more factors that would potentially draw in stereotypical attributes to the stereotypical female.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate description of like both why men and women are drawn in different ways. I think that's pretty accurate. So for people who are drawn to the occult, how do you think Orthodoxy fulfills the desires that you kind of have dispositionally? How does Orthodoxy fulfill that in a way that occultism doesn't, or maybe Orthodoxy fulfills it in a better way?
I wrote this screenplay to the movie that's being adapted from this book, partially because I didn't really want to expose people that could be potentially writing this screenplay. I asked for, permission and the blessing to do this and whatever, to like the things that I would have had to provide as resources. I didn't really want them to have to be exposed to that. And so I made this screenplay that is basically, how do you tell the story with no symbols, that you're exposing the viewer to, with no, harsh language, or, things are a little bit more implicative in this movie, but I definitely did not want to be showing like demon seals or, book titles in this context. And so, but yeah, there's this one scene that I wrote into this movie that is, that it happened. And there are a lot of different scenes that did happen in this movie that are not in the book. And I don't remember if I wrote this into the book or not, but there's this one point where I'm at the church and I have a psychic from my organization. She is there with me, and she is getting mauled by demons like every night. Very frequently. She has like claw marks all over her legs. And I cry with her about that frequently. And like there's so much pain. There is like no feeling like the priest will understand what we're going through. And part of that is like the locust me. And then part of it is also cultural, so she's going through this, she's getting attacked, she has injuries. She's afraid to go to sleep. She's sleeping at my house sometimes, and I'm lighting St. Michael candles around her, and I'm watching her while she sleeps so that she can get sleep, so that I can wake her up if I see a demon approaching her. Like things are really bad for her. And essentially we are sitting at a coffee hour table, and this guy, comes up to us, and he kind of like is trying to like joke with us a little bit, and he kind of notices that one of the rings that she's wearing has, something that is not like a really crazy occult symbol, but it could be like, interpreted as like this sort of new age ring that she's wearing. And he notices it, and he says, like, girls, listen, everything that you're looking for inside the church, like the mysticism, the intellectual satiation, everything that you're looking for that you would want to find, is inside the church. And like he kind of looks at us like, oh yeah, there's nothing else, friends, and she's hiding claw marks on her legs, and we're scared, and we can't really talk to anybody about this. We don't feel like we can talk to anybody about this. So we just kind of stare at him and like answer a little bit like, wow, like, please leave us alone, and I think that we were looking for protection, and the church offers us protection. It wasn't one of the things that he listed. but the church really does offer you everything, even if it's something that you haven't been explicitly told that it offers yet.
Yeah. Okay, so random curious questions that I have. In your book, you mention that you have kind of this association between, or I'm kind of gleaning this into what you wrote, that there's an association between your behavior and certain music scenes, and I definitely have noticed in my own life that music can affect us sort of on this subconscious level. So, what do you think the impact of music is on the spiritual disposition of people?
I think that people are drawn to specific music scenes, depending on what you're sure, like what their psychological attributes are, but also what their passions are. I think I came to notice, like, working in, parapsych intel, I would say, like, then you just start compulsively just like making these sort of like cultural assumptions about certain subgroups, right? Like, I kind of like, I was interested in like the goth scene because, I'm kind of like considering this because I felt that their passions were definitely aligning, in a certain way. Like there were certain, passions that we all sort of held, or reactions to society that we all sort of had in common. It was very interesting. Like, I don't even know like that I can say band names. Because you don't really want to say like rude words or blasphemous words or something like that. But like some of like the more manic, well-known death rock bands, um, with my experience with death rock, you have a lot of men, that adopt this like very dark, manic, flamboyant personality, and that was really interesting to me because it's obviously like a reaction to life events. Like you're reacting to something, like by having this output, right? And so then that's going to be different than people that are in like the speed metal scene, or like the post metal scene or the black metal scene or whatever. Like your reactions and your passions and things like that, sort of, your inclinations do inform your taste. I don't think that all the time like the music is creating this sort of like healthy output for people. You know what I mean? Like you can definitely be sad and listen to sad music and get sadder. But I do think that there is a reason why people are drawn to sad music in the first place. They probably have the logos made to indulge in sadness. You know what I mean?
Hmm. So, if I like metalcore, what does that mean about me?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a question for your spiritual father. He'll let you know. Oh my goodness! There's this one scene in the movie that I wrote in. I guess I'm just gonna like tell you the whole movie here. Like I'm an idiot, but like I definitely like make grindcore references in the movie. Because I think, yeah, I definitely put grindcore references in. Not because I was ever like super into grindcore, but because it's contextually appropriate in that scene. But yeah.
Okay, so as being someone who's kind of embedded in the occult world for a while, there's a lot of like conversation on like the Alex Jones types who will say that the people in power are very influenced by demons. They're doing witchcraft.
I love Alex Jones.
Yeah. So how much occult influence do you think is actually in politics, and how much is, I'm not going to say incidental, but it's hard to just write off and say, oh, like there's absolutely zero demonic influence, because you look at stuff like, whether it's the various wars going on or transhumanism and AI, and there's just a lot of stuff that's like, I don't think that came from humans. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Like, how widespread is that in politics?
I think that the thing that I love most about Alex Jones is how my like opinions of him have changed like throughout the decades. Because I used to
Mhm.
listen to him for fun. Like I would laugh about it. I mean, partially because it was comfortable to me. I grew up like in an apocalypse prepper household.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, this reminds me of home. But also, but also Alex Jones, he would go on these long rants about like the OTO. And he'd be like, these OTO people, they're crazy. They're insane. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. And I'd be like, yo, I have beef with like Joe down the street too. Like, cause he's like really hyped up about all these people that I'm interacting with on a regular basis. And so like, it was like really funny for me. Cause I'd be like, this is great, because he'd be like, they're up to something, and meanwhile like I'm talking to like bottom feeding like tithing OTO members at like a noise show or whatever, and they're just like dropping acid, and they're like, bro, did you know that you like can communicate with ISIS? And I'm like, bro, so like are you interested in spirit discernment? Like, are you interested in trying to like test spirits and kind of like discern them? And like, what are you using? Are you using seals? Are you using barbarous names? Like, what are you using? They're like, bro, you don't get it. Like, we're doing it, you know, like, and so then I'm hearing like Alex Jones, like, be like, these crazy people, they're masterminds, you know, and then, so it's just really funny for me. But now, like, I will like briefly be exposed to them. I don't really like, I try to stay away from a lot of popular culture and technology that's out there and things like this. But, you know, every now and then, like, somebody will say something, or like I will briefly, like, you know, be exposed to Alex Jones, and Alex Jones will be like, what he'll be like? He'll be like, what? He was on like Tucker Carlson recently, and he was like, yeah, they're opening up like sections of their mind to interface with demons. And I'm like, yeah. Bro, like, story of my life. You know, like, you know, I don't really like, I don't know everything that he's ever said. I can't really like condone everything that he's ever said. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's saying. But every now and then when I catch them, like, it's really funny to see my opinion shift to like, yeah, this is really bad. I think that he went on, it was like right after he got banned, but he went on like a rampage about scrying mirrors and people communicating with demons through scrying mirrors. And like, he's having a freak out. And like, you know, people in the occult community, everybody they kind of left it. We're just kind of like, where's the lie, honestly? Like, yeah, people are communicating with demons with using scrying mirrors. That is common knowledge. And I think that if you have like an adventurous personality, or like a trollish personality or whatever, like the occultism is like a really interesting place for you to land, because you can really do a lot. You know, people in the OTO, like, they know for a fact that like Crowley was like counterintelligence and he was employed by the British government, and like they know that he was, you know, intel, and they know that he didn't really like have amazing intentions, and they're just like, yes, I don't even want to say, but like, you know, like you can really like own being a psyop victim in the occult, and like think that it makes you better than everybody else. And you can really just like pump out a channeled book and like set yourself up for life. There's a lot of like opportunity to do stupid stuff that will seriously harm your soul.
Yeah. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, I was never as deep down the rabbit hole as you were, but I used to be a paranormal investigator. And this was back when I was still Baptist, before I had even known anything about Orthodoxy. So there's a paranormal team of mostly loosely Protestant Christians. There was like a lapsed Catholic that was in there also. But we were kind of coming at it from an angle of like, okay, we're not going to use Ouija boards. We're not going to do seances. We're not going to use tarot cards or anything like that. But we are going to try and investigate what's going on here on a spiritual level, because we did believe that ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to phrase it, that existed. And we were interested in proving it with our equipment scientifically to prove to the skeptics that, see, ghosts do exist. And where you go from there, we didn't really have answers because we didn't really know what we believed, to be honest. But B, we also, like, we did want to help people who were struggling. And like, a lot of the cases that we went to were like, you know, we went to somebody's house and they were having some kind of trouble not being able to live in that place normally. And so within that paradigm, you kind of have like different types of spirits. You have, you know, demons are a category of spirit. And then there's poltergeist, which are like known for throwing things. And then there's intelligent spirits who you can interact with, but they're not demons. And then there's residual spirits, which are just like, you know, the ghost you see in the second floor window at 1 o'clock every Saturday. It does the same thing, loop on repeat. So this is kind of a paradigm that I had in the past. And, you know, there was kind of this constant tension and dialectic between, you know, I was in the Bible Belt, between like the church going evangelicals and the circles that I was in, saying like everything's demons, and anything spiritual is demons. And then there was also like this spiritual experience that I'm having where it's like, well, the church that I go to says they believe in demons, but they're writing off these experiences that we're having and saying that it's not real. So there's kind of a tension there. And I had the kind of the opinion at the time where I was like, well, in a weird roundabout way, these experiences make me believe in Christianity more, because I have experience of the spiritual world through this, and they didn't lead me astray. Ultimately, I ended up to Orthodoxy. And so I was like, well, how can it be demons? But now I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I look back and I'm like, well, that was borderline necromancy. It wasn't exactly, we weren't intentionally summoning things, but we were trying to communicate with spirits. And that kind of skirts the line a little bit too much and is very spiritually dangerous. And I would not recommend people do it. And I would never do it again. So now I'm kind of trying to figure out, was that all a deception of sorts? Was that all, you know, are there different categories of demons or spirits, or like what is out there, and how do we conceptualize that? Anyway, that was a whole rambling thing. I don't really know what to do with that. And so I didn't know if you had any thoughts on the paranormal as such, and like, are they all demons, or is there more to it? What do you think about that?
I think like, when in doubt, demon it out. Like, I wouldn't be like hasty to trust spirit. In fact, I think one of the most helpful things that I've ever learned was at one monastery when I was 22. Yeah, I was 22. I was at this one monastery, and the trapeza reading was in English, so I could actually, you know, follow it this time. And yes, the story was, you know, essentially about like the saint, and an angel appeared to him, and he was like, no, I'm not worthy of an angel appearing to me. I'm going to need you to leave, you know. And then the angel appears to him again the next day, and he's like, yeah, I'm not worthy. So you must be a demon. Yeah, I'm rejecting this experience. And the third time, yeah, I don't know, like, I don't know what changed or what happened, or if there was a blessing, or where there's, you know, there was another situational factor. But it made me really understand that, generally speaking, it's pretty blessed to just like be like, I'm unworthy, tunnel vision, like, you know, like that God knows what you're doing. You're trying not to fall into deception. I think you read the like Yanonthicon and things like this, like you see how like scary things can get, you know, like there's that monk where like a ball of light appeared to him. He bows to the ball of light because he assumes it's like a holy thing. And then the ball of light like tells him to like throw himself down a well. and they really sell it to him. They feel like, this is like a spiritual situation and purpose, and this is going to teach you something in your ascetic life. And he throws himself down a well, and he dies. Is my understanding of it. Like, I have to look back on this or whatever, but yeah, and I think that our conceptualizations of categorizing spirits before orthodoxy tends to be extremely different. And I think that humans have like a natural tendency to want to label things and understand them and package them. So I definitely get that. And I do think that God puts experiences in our paths in order to, potentially solidify our faith in the future. I think one of the really like orthodox pilling experiences for me was understanding that that Orthodox believe that aliens are demons. I think that the Life Father started promoting like aliens are demons. And in the occult circles that I was in, people believed that like aliens were elemental spirits. And then, so then there's like this crossover with elemental spirits and potentially lesser demons. I was just like, I feel like I've full circled and everything is a demon. And, there's, and people will really try to justify it to you if you're like into like, magic that's like older and Greek or whatever. And you're like, the word demon comes from daemon, which just means like aerial spirits. Right. So then that's really viewed in a very positive light. But we also have this thing called aerial tool houses, so, I don't know.
Right.
I definitely I can't invest a lot of time and energy into trying to discern spirits that may or may not have their entire existence based on deception.
Right.
And I think that was one of the points of communication that was difficult for me, like that I wrote about in my book, is that like, I'm telling my priest for like the millionth time, I do see demons all the time, because he is taking me to a house blessing. And he's like, why are you so excited? And I'm like, I see demons all the time. I'd like to see them leave. And he's like, you don't see demons all the time. Otherwise you would just be unstable and you'd be freaking out. I'm like, I do all the time. And, so then at this point it's like, all right, you need to go to a clairvoyant monastic. Like, but he's like, are they big and ugly all the time? Because I knew somebody that was like you, that where she would see demons and they were big and ugly all the time. And like, there's this like pause because I'm like, okay, like demons are deceptive. They can change their form. Like, am I really like proving in this moment that I like am having these experiences by saying that they're big and ugly at all times, when sometimes, they appear as holy things or they appear as very terrifying things. And then you're like, what determines a root form? And I think that is a very occult thing to focus on, is that like people will try to summon demons in their true form. And, again, like how do you discern that? I think that I got so far into spirit discernment, I was like, yes, we're going to use seals now. And so that's how we're going to know for sure that we're summoning what we're summoning. Okay, yes, we're going to do the ritual perfectly secluded in the middle of a castle with the correct amount of fasting at the right times and the right hours at the right time of the year or whatever. And that's how we'll know that what we're summoning is perfect and it is what it says it is. And then at the very end of this, there's just orthodoxy. There's just like, ignore it. There's just like, I used to be so focused on like enacting revenge on demons. I think that was one of my motivations for, trying to become, more powerful as a ceremonial magician was, wanting revenge. I think that, I made it very clear in my book, I would have these sort of like fantasies about like how, I'm going to traditionally summon this demon that I believe, has, it's a lesser demon, like a Legion member that has tortured me my whole life. I'm going to summon this demon. I'm going to bind it. And, I'm going to make it feel pain, right? Because that's part of the deception too, is that you can really like dominate demons and make them feel pain. And, it really just pushes you further into this depraved sort of state. But yeah, I plan on binding it, and then it just asking me like, what do you want now? What can I do for you? And for me to say nothing. And I felt like that would be the ultimate position of power. But really, the ultimate position of power is something that, and it's not power, it's God's power, right? But the best thing that you can do is say the Jesus prayer, right? Because the demons catch on fire. And then every liturgy is an atomic bomb going off in hell. So it's really nice to be a part of that. But there are these really amazing resources. If you ever have any negative feelings towards demons, and I think about that sometimes. I used to invest so much energy in feeling so much pain about my situation of being afflicted and seeing my friends hurt and seeing me hurt and these sort of things. But I'm so lazy, I do not acquire the prayer of the heart, because if you acquire the prayer of the heart too, like, then you can bypass the toll houses this way. I'm gonna have to fact check myself on this. Like, I don't really like, but I think I remember reading one at some point, like, that if you have the prayer of the heart and your heart is beating and it is ascending, your soul is ascending to heaven through these aerial toll houses, and that you have the prayer inside your heart, it is just going automatically at this point, that they won't be able to come in proximity with you. Like, there's definitely this example of this elder that had reached a state of dispassion, and he just wanted to see if he could potentially have like a rude or passionate or dirty thought. And he tried to make himself have that, and it wouldn't enter his head. Like, it couldn't get near him, because he had acquired the prayer of the heart. We just have a lot of really amazing resources and new things to focus on that are really incredible and are the solution to all our problems. Crisis, the solution.
Right. Yeah, with regard to the paranormal stuff, the categorization of spirits, so to speak, definitely didn't come from like it came from a very like scientific and spiritualist worldview that kind of got like amalgamated into this weird thing. And I definitely, again, I cannot stress enough, do not go on like ghost hunts. Don't try to seek out spirits. I would not recommend it at all. And kind of like what you said, just defaulting to it's probably demons is probably, maybe you may or may not be right with that. But the thing is, it's spiritually safer to just leave it be and to not worry about it and to not try and, it's very hubristic to try and find answers to everything. Like, you don't need to know everything, and you probably don't need to figure that out. That's just not something that's pertinent to your salvation necessarily. So that's I just want to throw that out there for people to not seek stuff like that out. Yeah. So as we kind of get towards a conclusion here, you have like this. Would you say that you have a struggle with your propensity to see things, your psychic? Do you have a struggle with that now that you've become Orthodox? Do you think you're prone to still seeing or reading people in a way that you don't want to? And how does that affect you presently?
I would say no, honestly. I think that I got put in the right environment, and I have examples of people to look up to, and I have my own set of responsibilities at this point. Like, I was, able to sort of not have that be the the forefront of my mind. I think that, I went to a monastery for the first time when I was 22. And it really felt like the medicine that I always needed. I needed to be in this environment. I needed to be outside of the world. I needed to be outside of the cities, the billboards, and in a place that was really saturated with the Jesus prayer in order to heal and to focus. And I no longer identify as somebody that has psychic ability. I'm not tortured by constant visions of demons, and they do not injure me or hurt me as they once did. And I think that took time, and that took different circumstances, and that took a different set of priorities too. I kind of wonder sometimes if I didn't know how to have spiritual boundaries. You know how when you've been put in a situation where you've been victimized very heavily throughout your whole life, it's very difficult to learn what other people take for granted in terms of self-protection. So I think that potentially some people were able to have a little bit more boldness than I was in asserting themselves no, I'm God's. And I think that took me a very long time to sort of learn in stages. There was this very really wonderful, intense moment where I reconnected with somebody that had gone back to occultism. And at this point, I was in, a certain stage of discerning monasticism, and I had decided that was really what I wanted to do after all. And they kind of start talking about how I'm impressionable and I can be, my will can be manipulated and I can be used. And, they were kind of talking about these things and sort of implying these things. And at one point, I cut them off in this certain way. And I was just yeah, no, I'm going to go be a nun. This is impossible. I'm actually God's. There was this kind of shocked pause that needed sort of a recovery and a reframing. But I truly believe that. And I think that sometimes when you have been in a lot of negative experiences, it's hard to believe that you could be in healthier experiences in the future. So sometimes I kind of wonder if one of the reasons why I was so badly attacked is because I was having trouble conceptualizing myself as a person that was God's, that actually had this authority to say no in a stronger way or degree, because I demons had occupied my body for so long, and I did not see myself as a human being for a very long time. And so I think that transition into leading a more normal or average life where you're just kind of walking around, you're making actual decisions that are concrete decisions that you want to make. It took a while for that to become more of a reality.
Yeah. So what would be your warnings to people who are currently dabbling in the occult?
You have a lot to lose. You have a lot to lose. I mean, people talk about, your soul in the 12 houses. Yes. But, I definitely, I still deal with repercussions of continuing my lifestyle as a ceremonial magician while also receiving the Eucharist. I did damage my body very badly during that time, unintentionally. And I do think that the potential is there for that having been allowed. But yeah, I do struggle with some of the repercussions of my decisions. But I'm so grateful to be here. And, I think that one of the things that scared me the most about continuing a life of occultism was the breaks, the breaks from reality. And I think that if you're talking to spirits all the time, you're relying on information from spirits, you're relying on sort of like these party trick sort of things, these, things that you think that you're using for your own benefit, or you're reclaiming something, or you're doing something, really can lead to not being aware of certain physical realities. And I think that was always the scariest thing for me. Like, oh my goodness, like everybody around me reports having at one point a psychotic break. I really hope that doesn't happen to me, but I think that one of the big pills that I have to swallow is that a lot of times that stuff does not go unchecked. And it's like, it doesn't always end with somebody being on medication and, or being hospitalized, or being, having people to take care of them. Sometimes it looks like somebody saying, I'm getting information from spirits, and then they say some really crazy things that are just not, they're just not true. Like, they can't really even be manipulated or repackaged into to being fact. And then they move on, or you move on, and they continue on with the rest of their lives. And so I think that, a pill to swallow is potentially like that. I have done that to other people. I don't think that I've always been checked. I've wrote some pretty cringe occult books, and I think that that's part of my motivation for writing this book and being involved with the movie, is so that I can create something that potentially people will relate to, in which they could potentially help them through that relatability make a decision about coming to the church. Because the first time that I was ever in an Orthodox church, a reader told me, I think he was just on his mind or something like this, but God really used that. And he said that, like, authors, the sin is a lot worse when you write heretical books or bad books or whatever, because people will read that for hundreds of years later. Whereas, if you commit a sin in this life at this time, the span of people that you're going to hurt is potentially a little bit more limited. And so, I wrote some occult books, and I edited some occult books, and some satanic books and stuff like that. And so I really have prayed for an opportunity to correct that, or potentially one day do more good than I have done harm, so that I can rest when I die. So in a way, I'm preparing for my death. I want to correct what I've done.
Okay, so your book, outside of the world,
yeah, outside of the world.
Yeah, that is in process of becoming a movie. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, and like, what does that look like? What is the timeline on that for people?
I actually don't have details on the timeline that I can disclose at this point. All I can really say is that the screenplay's been written, and it's in developmental stages. And I think that it focuses more on the emotion and the experiences, rather than like sort of trying to vomit up facts. I did a lot of like really trying to recount with the book, like, this is what happened. This was the situation. This is what books that I was working in. This is the background that I came from, and these are the things that are of concern. Whereas this, it's a little bit more like communicative about the experiences, and the emotional and psychological tones and implications, and a fuller understanding of the situations, for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Well, do you have any other resources that you'd like to leave people with if they're curious about where to learn more in a proper way, to kind of orient them towards the church?
Father Seraphim Rose's books are great. I mentioned some other books in my book that inspired me, and then I also wrote this pamphlet. The pamphlet is sort of like written at the point of wanting to help, loved one, if they were sort of like going into that, like that pre-less hole, like that, like they're sort of like about to break, and stop thinking about like information that they're physically experiencing and starting to prioritize their sensuous perception more than that physical reality. And so that's like the intentions that I was writing this pamphlet with. And I would definitely, if you were like me and you're sort of like, you grew up with this and this is of interest to you, or this is like a matter of trying to figure out exactly what's going on with you, I would recommend visiting a monastery, because I think that the prayer in the environment is very soothing, and then you will also see people that are used to constant spiritual battle, that are used to trying to discern information, and you will probably like pick up on a lot of the resources and traditions that are there that way, I feel. And more spiritual books, I think that having references for like the lives of the saints and things like that is very helpful. You're resting in your subconscious, that you can kind of pull from and be like, I kind of remember when somebody else went through something like this and how they handled it.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Justine, for being willing to do an interview with me. I think it's been really insightful, and I hope that more people from your background will be edified and come to the church. So thank you.
Glory to God. Thank you for having me.